Welcome back to the afternoon session of Navigating the Path to Emotional Wellness. My name is Lisa Marisadea, and I'm the parish nurse with the Gastonia Parish Nurse Ministry. Our topic, you're tuned in right now for our fourth speaker of the day. Dr. Trish Murray is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and supervisor who has been providing counseling services to individuals and couples for over 25 years. She has worked in various settings, including college and university counseling centers, community mental health, employee assistance, and addiction centers. She has worked with people to help them address issues related to anxiety, depression, work-related stress, career transitions, grief and loss, self-care, and resilience. She earned her PhD in counselor education and supervision from the University of South Carolina in Columbia, Master of Arts in Community Counseling from West Virginia University, and her Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology from Geneva College. Trish's talk today is on self-care and learning to practice calm in a chaotic world. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I want to thank Lisa for inviting me here and for having this opportunity and this platform to be able to talk about mental health related issues and especially with respect to self-care. It's such an important topic. And I also want to thank Rusk, who informed me about this, and when he asked what I wanted to present on, my first thought was I would like to do something on self-care and self-compassion. Those are two areas that are really important to me and dear to me, and so I was excited about it, and I want this to be known before we get started. This topic, practicing calm in a chaotic world, related to self-care, was decided upon long before COVID-19 came. So it's not that COVID-19 comes and we do this topic. It was before that. So that being said, I think it's even more poignant now that we really seriously consider self-care and how we're practicing it. But I wanted that to be put out there for people to know that it was there. And I want to say a couple other things before we get started. So I've talked on this topic and I prepared for this topic, this one in particular, pretty extensively. And with that, I also have notes that I might glance at. And the reason for that, quite simply, is because this topic is important to me and I don't want to miss anything. And I want to make sure that I can give you what I have so that you can take it with you. The other thing I want to say is that today's topic, this is more about assessing where we are with self-care, not necessarily developing a plan of self-care. So that, just to note that. We're going to be looking at self-care and different aspects of it and different elements therein and assessing where we are. And a plan may evolve from that, but I just wanted to make that known. The last thing, and then we'll jump in, is you were asked to have a piece of paper and a pen before you, and I hope that you did do that, because this platform is a little bit different, because while there's a couple hundred people watching, this is empty, and generally you get your energy from people in the room, and there's no one really in the room. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get the energy from you from the outside coming in. Although even though I don't see you, I just got to know that you're there. So that being said, if you would bring that piece of paper close by and that pen, and we'll go ahead and get started. So as I think about self-care and as I thought about it, there's a variety of metaphors that people use to describe the elements of self-care. For example, they talk about a wellness wheel, at which point each spoke of the wheel will represent an area of self-care, for example, like social or physical. So they look at it as a wheel. Others look at it through the lens of a flower, with each petal representing an area of self-care. And Still others look at it with respect to like a garden, with each plot of the garden representing an area of self-care that you may need to water so that that area needs to thrive and flourish. And the lens through which I view it is buckets. So that's my preferred view, is looking at it through buckets. So if you'll turn that, and that next side, there you go. So there we have a bucket that's on a door ledge. Sometimes people think that self-care is a threat, similar to what that bucket could be a threat. And my goal today is to convince you that self-care isn't a threat. And it's not anything to be concerned about, but it is something to be mindful of. So I think it's really important to know where your buckets are so that you don't get caught off guard with them. And if you can go ahead and flip that. So I have a question for you, and I want you to consider it, is how do you view self-care? Do you see it as a priority and necessary, or do you look at it through the lens of it's sort of a luxury, sort of an additive or an add-on? And by that I mean that so oftentimes people will think, getting a massage is like that's a luxury, and self-care doesn't have to be that to that degree. But at the same time, if you look at it through the lens of a necessity, I don't know what that was. I hope it didn't jolt people. But at any rate, so if you look at it through the lens of something necessary, then that's taking care of your physical body. And if a massage is one way to do that, then you can see that it's more necessary to keep your body more vibrant and ready to go. So and I want to say something to as we move on to buckets, as we saw that previous one, and moving on to the next slide. Sometimes buckets of self-care can be overwhelming, and those are a lot of buckets. And if you think about it, it can feel chaotic of various aspects of self-care, as I noted earlier, like social or physical. You can ask yourself a variety of questions and determining under which you can see if it's a physical thing, am I taking care of myself, am I brushing my teeth, am I showering, am I eating? That's true, but if you take each component and make that a bucket, that's not what we're looking at. So I'm going to make it more simple. And we're going to pare that down into 6 focal points of self-care today. And theorists they run the spectrum from anywhere from 6 areas to 12 areas. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to keep it at 6 for us to take a look at and just take it from there. So given that, at this point, if you would, grab that piece of paper and bring it down close to you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take and draw 6 buckets on that piece of paper. I'm going to give you a minute to do it. We have an example of one so that you know. Hopefully you can see it. So just take a moment and draw 6 buckets. No one's going to see it. It's just for you to see. And we'll label them as we go. So now the other thing I'd like you to do, I'd like you to take that same piece of paper, and I'd like you to turn it over. And I'm going to put forth 5, 6 phrases. You don't have to write them all down, but I'm going to ask you to choose one, and I'll go through them twice. But on the top third of your paper, I'd like you to just write one of these phrases. Again, I'll go through them twice, give you opportunity to think it through, and choose which one you want to write. And somewhere on the top third. So, you're just going to write the phrase, and you're going to leave it blank to be filled in later. So, the first one being, thank you for, I appreciate you, I really felt supported when you, it meant a lot to me that you, and I'm grateful to you for. So I'm going to run through those one more time. Thank you for, I appreciate you, I really felt supported when you, it meant a lot to me that you, and I am grateful to you for. So as you think about whichever phrase you want, go ahead, take a moment, write that down. And now what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead and turn that paper back over. We're going to go back to the buckets. And as I said earlier, we're going to move from this, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to give you the areas that we're going to review in terms of the elements of self-care. And as I said, I chose 6. So I'm going to this is about assessing where you are. This is not about, it's about just sort of taking consideration of where you are. This is not necessarily about developing a plan, but it is looking inward. And with that, I want to note something. This is where self-compassion comes in for me. So self-compassion is about how you speak to yourself or demonstrating compassion for yourself in times of adversity, failures, or suffering. Being able to show yourself a degree of compassion such as you would a friend. And there's a few elements of self-compassion. There's 3 actually, and you can look this up, selfcompassion.org. It's a wonderful thing to consider. But the first one element is mindfulness, the other one is common humanity, and the third one is self-kindness. So we're going to touch on those as we go through the areas of self-care, which are larger and broader, but you'll see how they interweave as we move along. So the first bucket, and I'm just going to ask you questions. And as I ask you questions, I want you to consider how full or empty the bucket is, and what you might need to fill it. And the interesting thing about a bucket that I do want to note is these ones are transparent, but which is great, so you can get a sense of how full the buckets are. But with respect to a bucket, when you fill a bucket with water, it gives you an idea of measurement. It tells you how high it is or how low it is and what it needs to bring more to it. But the other thing with the bucket is when you fill it, if you've ever filled a bucket to its height and you look down, you can see your reflection in the water that's there. But if the bucket doesn't have as much water in it, if I look down, if this is full, I can see my reflection pretty easily. If it's not so full, then I have to go in deeper to the bucket to see it. And that's not to have any judgment attached to it, it's just an awareness of. And with that awareness, this is where the idea of self-compassion comes in, where you can just offer yourself more encouragement to versus judgment of where it is. So let's start with the first bucket that I put out there. And it's the spiritual bucket. And some things to consider with respect to the spiritual bucket is, here's some questions to ask yourself. Generally, with the spiritual bucket, it's about purpose. It's purpose in being here. And so as you think about, how do I find my purpose? From where does my identity stem? And are you engaging in practices that are in alignment with your value system? Do you have an active prayer life or times of quiet? Are you meditating? Or are you being driven? Do you have a sense of calm? Do you, again, practice things that connect with your spiritual tradition so that this can continue to grow? Do you read inspirational literature that's attached to it? Do you have a mentor? Or somebody with whom you connect with regard to your own spiritual tradition to help support you there? So what I'd like you to do is just take a moment, think over those questions, reflect on it for just a moment. And as you do, where your bucket is, and you can still see on the screen, there's a line. It says spiritual underneath. You can label them as we go. And there's a line of how full that bucket is. So for yourself, take a moment and think about where you are in terms of your spiritual self-care. And ask yourself, what's the level of my spiritual wellness, and how much self-care do I need to add to it? And just reflect on that question. That's going to be the theme, the theme of question. That's going to the theme with respect to each area of self-care. So that's the spiritual side of things. The next one is physical. Physical is, again, we're going to go back to COVID because it's interesting. Trying to find ways to engage in self-care and physically during COVID can be a little bit challenging. But I will say this, I've never seen more people out walking than I have since COVID has begun. And I think it's wonderful. I've never seen more people run than I have more recently. So, I mean, the YMCAs are closed right now and soon to reopen, but given that, people are outside. And fortunately, it's spring and people are able to do that. But to ask yourself, what am I doing? In what capacity am I engaging in exercising? Another question is like, how am I fueling my body? What am I putting in? Am I putting in fast food, or am I eating in a more nutritious way? Since most restaurants, you're not allowed to go in, so it's more takeout, but a lot of people are eating more healthy now because they're eating at home. And so that's encouraging to note. Another question is, how is your sleep? You can ask yourself, am I getting quality sleep at night? Am I getting enough hours of sleep? Sleep is imperative. Sleep is restorative. And so often what people will say to me is, I'll just catch up on the weekend. And I have to remind them that there is no catching up. The 24 hours is done. It's over. So it's renewed every day. So they're not going to be able to catch up on the weekend. So to consider that for yourself is, how am I going to bed at the same time? Generally, that's optimal. To go to bed around the same time every night and get up the same time every morning, even on weekends, to keep it consistent and keep your body regulated. That's an important piece of it. The next area is social. So, in this area, as I said earlier, I referenced self-compassion over in the spiritual and speaking a little bit of mindfulness there. With social, this is where the common humanity comes in. That I'm not alone, that other people have suffered as I have, and I can connect with them when needed. And it's important to remember that. And by that, just looking at your social connections. And there's a card that I saw that I just wanted to read it to you. I did not put it on the slide. I just wanted to read it. One, because it fills my bucket, and I needed something to fill the bucket. So, but the card said, this is by Ralph Waldo Emerson. A friend may well be reckoned the masterpiece of nature. I thought that was a great quote. And to ask yourself, Do you have relationships that are fulfilling? Or you have relationships that are more taking from you and that you may need to separate from, and that's okay. But just to note where you stand with that. Do you have a support system in place? Oftentimes, again, some of the buckets can overlap. So oftentimes, if you practice a certain, if church relationships, that can fulfill that social aspect of things. And I know people that work together, and they're not just work friends, they're friends outside of work too. So that connection transcends just that occupation. The other thing with social, when I just said a second ago about if friends or if there's someone that you need to let go of, that's okay. But with respect to that, it's just knowing your boundaries. Where you stop and the other begins. It's important to know that, and being able to have a more healthy relationship. And then one other area is communication. How do you deal with conflict with people? Do you tend to avoid it, or are you able to sit through it? And part of that is not only with respect to social, but that's also with knowing oneself. And we'll touch on that in a minute. So take a moment and look at that, or consider social, and put a line somewhere of how full that bucket is. The next one is psychological. This is the one this is for our brain. And with respect to this, are you making enough time to stimulate your mind? Are you engaging in activities that your brain is continuing to grow and thrive? It's something that's important to do is to learn something new every day, or maybe take risks into something different. The brain likes novelty. If you can do puzzles, So the question is, ask yourself, am I doing proactive things to keep my mind engaged? So take a moment, think about that, put a line where that is and where that bucket is. And then the next one, and I put this one up here, financial. This is an area of wellness. You can consider it like occupational wellness or financial wellness, but I have found this more recently with people, especially in my practice, people talking about their concerns over finances as it relates to COVID and what that means for them and with respect to their occupation, and then just the financial piece of things. And so that's been a topic of conversation. And so one of the things that I've often asked people is, what is your relationship to money? In other words, how does it impact the quality of life? Are you living consistent with your value system as it relates to money? Am I, using money as a way to escape or avoid, or am I, am I using money appropriately? Do you know how to do a budget? Do you spend as a way to relieve stress, versus spend money, like I said, in an appropriate way that its intended purpose, for utilitarian reasons, Do you, again, live according to your values? Or are you going outside of that and then impacting just your sense of self? In terms of, even with work, are you working at a job that you love, or are you working at a job that is just supplying financial means? And if that's what you want to do, that's fine. It's just noting if that's in alignment with your value. So it's about just considering that. And last but not least is the idea of the emotional wellness. And And with respect to emotional wellness, this is just, it's what it is. It's about, do you have a healthy way to process your emotions? And one thing I say to people all the time, like, emotions, they run the gamut, and there's not a value attached to them. Emotions are emotions. And I think Dr. Ingram referenced that earlier, but there's not an attachment of value to an emotion. It's just noticing the emotion. It's not a good or a bad thing, it's just a thing. But it's an important thing. And I tell people all the time, emotions they're not good or bad, they just provide information. And it's just wanting to know what the information and what to do with the information. That's what we want to look at. Something else with emotions and this side of this aspect of ourself is, I asked earlier about, made a reference about self-compassion and how do you treat yourself. And this area is more about like self-kindness. And as I noted about emotions, how do you treat yourself with emotions whenever they come up? Do you berate yourself for them, or do you simply acknowledge them? And the other thing is, how do you respond to yourself when you experience an accomplishment? Do you congratulate yourself? When you show up somewhere, when it was challenging to show up, but you did it, do you thank yourself for it? Or do you just notice it? When you make a mistake, do you berate yourself for it, or do you treat yourself with kindness? And this is an example of that. You may not be able to see it, but this is an eraser that says "Oops," and it's a very thick eraser. And it was together. It didn't come like this. But I had somebody that came into my office years ago that was under a great deal of stress. And they were under so much stress that they were shaking, and they ended up breaking this eraser in half. It's hard to do. And then they were so apologetic for breaking this eraser when it says "Oops." And I thought it was the greatest thing that could happen. And I started laughing. And they were shaking, and I said, I couldn't help but laugh, because it really speaks to this about it was a mistake. And I wanted him to see it's a mistake, and it's that he's okay. It's a mistake that was made. And he was eventually able to see the humor in it, but it took him a little while to know that, his person is okay. This just represents a mistake that is easily remedied in one sense of the word. And I mean, this eraser can never go back together, but it's still usable. And it's something that just represents something else. It has its function is still the same, the quality of it is still the same. That doesn't change. So with respect to your emotional self, asking yourself, how do you talk to yourself? So take a moment and consider what level that emotional self is, and take a moment and mark that in terms of how full that is. So now, as you do that, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take a moment, I'd like you to look at all of the buckets. And I want you to note which ones are where the fill lines are, and which ones that you can just glance down and you can see your reflection with relative ease, and which ones may be a little bit lower where you have to kneel down and go a little deeper. And I want you to do that, but I don't want you to do it with judgment. Do it with curiosity, and do it with a sense of compassion, of You know, if my financial bucket is low, okay, just noticing it, and asking, okay, the steps I need to take in order to, to fill that. But the way to fill it isn't through berating yourself or beating yourself up. That doesn't necessarily work, as we note. And as I said earlier, other buckets spill into other buckets. Learning something new. So asking yourself, what is your level of wellness and how much care do you need? So something I would like to do is I want to do two things, because I think it can be a helpful exercise. We started with the spiritual, and I referenced mindfulness there. And what I'd like to do is I would just we'll do a very short exercise in mindfulness. And if you would, could you turn that over? I'm going to have you just take a moment, and wherever you are, we're going to practice mindfulness, and it's going to be a very short experience of one. But before you, there's a sunset happening, and I think it's a pretty beautiful sunset, and so I put it there. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take a moment. I'd like you to, with your eyes open, I'd like you just to take a breath in, hold, and exhale. I'm going to have you take another breath in, hold. Go ahead and exhale. And then this last time, take a breath in, hold, and then exhale. And as you exhale, allow your eyes to soften their gaze, or if you're comfortable, allow them to close. And allow your breath to come back to normal. And just noticing the rise and fall of your chest. And just tuning into your breath. And letting thoughts just come and go, and not tuning into them, but as they do, just notice them and just come back to your breath. Focusing on the inhale. Allowing yourself to hold, and then releasing the exhale. Again, just focusing on the inhale. And the exhale. Breathing in. Breathing out. Just noticing that you're being held up by the chair or beneath you, or the couch, or wherever you're seated. There's no effort. Continue to allow yourself to breathe and focus on the breath. If your mind wants to wander away, go ahead and let it. Just notice where it's going, and let it jump from topic to topic if it so wishes, or consider what's happening for the rest of the day if that's the case. Just allow that to happen. Go ahead and bring it back and just focus on your breath. Again, focusing on the inhale. And releasing the exhale. Tuning into the rise and fall of your chest. There's no pressure to be anywhere but where you are. And allow yourself to experience the present moment. Each inhale and each exhale. When you're ready, bring yourself back to wherever you are, opening your eyes and noting your surroundings and continuing to breathe and reorient yourself to where you are. And that's an experience of mindfulness as it relates to self-compassion. One other thing that I'd like to do before you close is that piece of paper that I had you pull out in the beginning and write a phrase on. I'd like you to pull that back out. And next to that phrase, at the very top, up before that phrase, I'd like you to write, "Dear," and I'd like you to fill in your own name. So for example, if it were me, I would say, "Dear Trish." And I'm going to I'll offer what I would write for myself. That, "Dear Trish, it meant a lot to me that you exercised today. Thanks again. Love, Trish." So I'd offer you to do something very similar for yourself. Research has shown that gratitude does a great deal for us. It increases mood. It increases resilience, which is a topic people are noting of late. So again, just write, "Dear," fill in your name, whatever phrase you chose, ending it with "Thanks again, love," your name. Could you pull up the next slide, please? So, as we close, I just wanted to put up this for you to take away. Check your buckets. Just remember that. There are 6 here. You can find all kinds of things on the internet for them. And you can find ways to plan. Today was assessing, just checking where they are. Where are my levels? And offering yourself compassion and considering, how can I fill it? And if you need support in understanding that or devising a plan, I'm more than happy to help. And other resources are out there that people are happy to help. But check your buckets. And these are the 6 here. Adjust the levels in your buckets as you need to. Get help, as I said. And I think what really captures it is practice self-compassion as you walk through it. So that's all. So I'm open for any questions or... Thank you all.
Trish, thank you so much for a great presentation, and I think we could all always benefit from a reminder to practice self-care and not feel guilty about it. So thank you for offering us a good project in assessment of that. So look forward to learning more. If we do have some questions that were texted in, and you can still text in your questions now. Trish, what can we do to keep from feeling guilty for practicing self-care?
That is a good question, and in essence, that it speaks to the necessity of self-care, and because it's not a luxury, it's vital. And if you go back to in some respects, if you can think about it on the airplanes, put the oxygen mask on yourself first in order to put that forth. And some other metaphors is you can't pour from an empty cup. So needing to pour into self in order to pour out to others adequately, I think is to know that.
Thank you. Do you have tips for practicing mindfulness more frequently?
Again, another great question, and there's an app, actually. It's called Headspace, which is a great app for people if they want to use that. But some of that is more the discipline of, and making it a practice of. And this is what I encourage people to do. Like today was a short version. It was 3 minutes long, and to start small, to not set really high goals for self, but to make it more manageable. Like do it for 3 minutes, and then maybe extend it for 5 minutes. But one time a day, try to do that, or set an alarm on your phone. Like today, I'll practice mindfulness, or at a particular time. That can help people.
That's good. If you find yourself in a rut in expressing your emotions, how might you open up in truly expressing the emotions?
If you find yourself in a rut,
in expressing them, how can you open up to truly express those emotions?
Again, good question. This is what I do as a therapist when people are struggling with that. One thing I encourage is for people to write. I'm a firm believer, not only as a therapist, but even personally, I journal. And I think there's something magical that happens between the pen and the paper. And I think if you find yourself challenged with expressing emotion, perhaps write them first to see what's going on with respect to them. And the other piece of that is if just to see if there's a theme of which emotions are more challenging, and if that's the case, again, being just curious about it, and potentially talking to somebody, but maybe writing it out to see what's there.
Good advice. Men tend to not rely upon support. How can men find support when they tend to be so private?
I'm not sure if this was a question from a man, or not. So, how can men find support when they tend to be private? And again, if this is a person if this is a man raising the question, or if this is somebody asking on behalf of somebody else, that's where the challenge becomes. But how can men find support when they tend to be private? Going back to the point, I'm going to go back to the social bucket, because I think that's an important thing. It's important to have a tribe, however you view it. But, in terms of finding support through that, I guess I would inquire of that person. Self-care, that social bucket is not necessarily because there's an issue or a problem. It's just acknowledging relationships and being a part of that, and maybe encouraging that through that lens of support may indicate a deficit or something being wrong versus just hanging out with the guys type of thing, and developing social relationships in that way. So, and that support then could come by more organic in that way.
Great. Thank you. And our last question is, how can you practice self-care if you have trouble slowing down or feel like you always have to be doing something productive?
That is a great question. And somebody must know me, and they wrote that
Me too.
question about me. So, and I don't think that's fair, but I'll answer the question. So, how do you practice self-care if you have trouble slowing down? It's something that I do. As I said earlier, one of the things I often do is I offer myself. Self-care can be practiced in a variety of ways, and if I'm in a challenging place, I'm somebody that likes to be busy. That is actually self-care for me. That's not necessarily a negative thing. It's acknowledging that I don't necessarily have to, quote, slow down. It's more just acknowledging that that's also an aspect of self-care. There's no one way to look at it. It doesn't mean if I'm meditating for 45 minutes a day that's only one way to do it. There's multiple ways to do it. So if somebody was wanting to slow down, then it's about, for them to ask them, going back to what's in the way, what's not allowing you to slow down, and again, through a lens of compassion, how you can incorporate some of that pause. That's what I would offer.
Very good. Well, thank you again for a wonderful presentation. We appreciate you being here in our virtual environment, and
Thank
look
you.
forward to hearing you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.